And thank you to the Brumen Foundation, what a fantastic organisation. Thanks to all the designers who submitted work to this contest we judged yesterday. I learned so much and was so inspired, so thank you for that. Thanks to you for sticking around all day, deprived of oxygen and food at this point. So I do hope I can provide a little nutrition and oxygen for the brain with this last presentation. I'm a design critic, as Petra said, not a designer, and that is kind of part of the story. I'm the chair of a MFA program in design criticism at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And in my talk today, I'm going to be addressing the relationship between design practice and its criticism. Now, I have a footnote to the title for my parents, who've just arrived, actually. Hi. Good timing. Very nice. It's all in the family here. And that is just in case. They probably do know this, but I haven't seen them for a while. BFF means best friends forever, and LOL is laugh out loud, which is a joke. And the three main reasons designers and critics are not best friends forever are, firstly, because designers often think critics laugh at their work. They also think critics are mean about their work. And if you've seen the movie Ratatouille, has people seen this? You remember this fantastic food critic, Anton Ego? He really banged home the nail in the critic's coffin by saying, in many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and their selves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read. And the third problem, according to designers, is that critics just don't understand their work. This leads to a prickly situation between designers and critics. And in this graphic, I'm going to show you the number of designers in the US who think critics are defensive, mean, or ill-informed. So when the British magazine, Graphic, now defunct, I believe, which is another sign of the times of this tense relationship, when they were doing a special report on design criticism, one of the questions they asked me was, do you think design criticism has an image problem? I had to answer, hell yes. Here's a quote from a blog commenter on Subtraction, which is an American blog, and this anonymous troll is called Niggle. He says, critics are parasites, nasty, snide little lowlifes who contribute nothing to our great community. Now that's what I call an image problem. And you see, on the other side of the image problem coin, you've got members of the public and academics who actually see critics as being too friendly with designers, too close, PR agents. They think that the proximity of design writing to the design studio, to the professional concerns of the industry, means that its effect will always be promotional rather than critical. So, designers hate us because they think we're too mean, and everyone else hates us because they think we're too friendly with designers. It's enough to give a critic an identity complex. And then we get even more confused because there's a bunch of designers out there telling us that they want more criticism. Can't get enough of it, apparently. This is the American designer already referenced today, Massimo Vignelli. His 1983 keynote speech for the first symposium on the history of graphic design, which took place at the Rochester Institute of Technology, was titled A Call for Criticism. You can see him here at his glorious rectilinear office crafting such a piece. Vignelli, who was trained in architecture, believed that graphic design desperately needed criticism to make it whole and mature, a real discipline, you know, like film and art and theatre. Without criticism, he said, we will never have a profession. And this call for design criticism has echoed down the decades, actually. I'm sure you've seen versions of it yourself. On the blog Subtraction, there's a digital designer, Koi Bin, who used to design the online edition of the New York Times. And in a 2009 post titled Dear Designer, You Suck, he says, "You can't have a serious discourse about an art form until you have people whose sole involvement in that art form is criticism." And I get a little weary sometimes of all these calls for criticism. There's a whole lot of calling and not actually that much doing. And I wonder, what do these designers think design criticism is, and why do they want it? When you do a search for design criticism on Google, as I'm sure I may be the only person who does, but a whole host of articles appear with titles such as "How to Handle Design Criticism," "How to Manage Design Criticism Effectively," and 7 Effective Ways to Deal with Criticism. So these are sort of typical of the, articles in circulation on the topic, or images from them. This probably is the most typical. So dealing, managing, and handling. These are verbs more usually applied to a naughty child or an untrained dog. They don't exactly suggest fruitful debate. What I think is going on here is that the authors of pieces like these, and their many, many retweeting followers, are confusing feedback with criticism. Now, feedback is immensely useful and provides a designer with a professional review. And its criticism can perform as feedback, but it's just not the whole story, and that's what I want to tell you about today. Design criticism has a larger and more social, and sometimes moral, purpose. It distinguishes what is harmful and wasteful from what is meaningful and valuable, and it calls it out, and it takes it down when it has to. At other gentler moments, it is exploratory and questioning. In essence, design criticism is the interrogation of all aspects of the design environment in order to discern what they mean, why, and how. So I really do believe it's not criticism's sole job to service design's insecurities and its professional needs, nor even to be its social conscience. Okay, so how do we escape this impasse that I've described? I really think we need to move design criticism beyond the design studio. And that may sound counterintuitive, but I'll come back to it. Design criticism is for everybody who uses or encounters design. Excellent design criticism can create an intellectual climate with shared terms of reference in which the clients, the public, and designers can really meet and debate and demand the best of designers. And so where things get really interesting, in my opinion, and where it's possible to bring both design and design criticism into mainstream public debates, which is where I absolutely believe they should belong, is where an instance of design is used as a springboard, a departure point for a critique that's aimed outward at society. All the things that design touches have to come into play. So I thought we could take the typology of a public bench as an example of how a design thing might be used as a launchpad for social critique. So I'm just going to kind of whiz you through my thinking process when I see this rather sort of decrepit looking example of the species. So the bench is a site for very mundane moments of in-between non-activity, sitting, waiting, contemplating, eating your packed lunch. Perhaps Oliver is sitting there in silence and the torture of silence. It can also be the site of heightened human emotion. Clandestine rendezvous, breakups, exchanges of top-secret files, and purchase of drugs. It's a blank canvas for this. It allows for discussion of the different constituencies implicated in its design, manufacture, upkeep, use, and misuse. So, if I was writing about this, I would have to talk about the planners and policymakers who commissioned it and decided where it should be located and how much it should cost. park attendants who maintain it, the old man who feeds pigeons from it, and the girl who skateboards along its edge. A full portrait of this bench would include discussion of issues such as sustainability of materials, climate, construction techniques, ergonomics, durability, cost, vandalism, theft, safety, gender issues, and on, whatever you're interested in. It would include a brief history of bench design, a comparison to other benches showing how this one differs and why, and its relationship to other street furniture. Why hasn't this one been mended? Why is there no shade over it? Why no trash can? Before you know it, you've gone from writing about a broken down old bench to telling a story about the art and practice of sitting down in public. And I really think, the bench could be a good way to get people to think about the intentionality of design and its implications. It has lots of different facets. It gives us a way into design, a discussion of design as a central protagonist. After all, a bench can actually behave very interestingly. It can grow out of the ground, or grow along a street over the course of a week, if everyone chips in. This was in Vienna. It can bear mutant offspring when mated with other things. At the top, if it's mated with a barrier, you get a barrier bench, or with a fence, you get a fence with a bench. It can double up as steps. It can connect the social realm to the digital realm through social media. This is specifically a Twitter bench. And this one can actually connect you to the other side of the globe. This bench is placed next to a wall onto which is projected the real-time image of another bench in another city. So you could be sitting in the main square in Ljubljana, eating your lunch, chatting and flirting with someone in Cape Town, providing the time difference was on your side. Sometimes the bench gets up and walks itself into the shade, or under a rain shelter, or shivers when it gets cold, and sings barbershop harmonies when the sun comes out. Sometimes benches encourage sidewalk psychoanalysis. This is by Antenna Design, and they notice this sort of naturally occurring activity, and they've amplified it so that the bench itself as an object starts to exert a kind of agency or influence on the people around it. It makes you use it in that way. Some benches trigger conversation about sustainability and reuse. This one is the winner of a Core 77 competition to design and fabricate a park bench out of a propane tank, or an old one. These bench sculptures by Francis Cape, which may fall more into the category of art, I'm not sure, but they really allow a way into a discussion of the impact of the relationship to religion and design. They give material form to the concept of communalism as opposed to individualism, and they're an interesting commentary. This project rethinks the Windsor chair, which is actually a very sort of everyday icon of American design. Unexpected detailing in these seemingly ordinary objects makes you question your ideas about what's right and wrong in design. It's good fun. This is a new phenomenon called bench bombing, and these very altruistic characters down here apparently carry benches with them at all times, ready to insert them into situations that need them to create a social scene. We could have done with a few at the back here today, actually. It would have been very useful. And of course, that's this idea of sort of creating closer contact between people through the form of the bench is definitely something that gets explored by the Dutch conceptual design firm Droog. And as you can see, the seats on this bench are on a sea of marbles. So if you sit on one, you automatically slide along and bump into your neighbour, demonstrated by their rather otherworldly-looking models here. Okay, those are all positive things about benches, which seem exciting to me. But sometimes the bench is used in really socially toxic ways. Many public benches are intentionally designed to prevent homeless people from sleeping on them. I haven't actually seen that here in this city. I would like to have a look at some examples. But in many cities, there are most ingenious techniques employed to make benches slippery, sloping, small, or otherwise uncomfortable. I'd want to know how much money goes into these projects. compared with the cost of homeless shelters in a city, to see if we could use the relative friendliness or hostility of the bench as an index of a community's social health. These are just some examples in different places, in China, in Honolulu, Oxford. And as a really fun critical response to this situation, Sarah Ross made these fantastic Archie suits. So she made these 4 leisure jogging suits, which are designed for specific architectural situations in Los Angeles, which is where she's based. And as you can see, the suits use the negative space of the structures and allow a wearer to sit or lie or fit into the very structures designed to deny them. So, like this. And here's her solution to the bench problem. Pretty ingenious, right? I also particularly like her research process. Different bench. So, you might term this kind of work critical design, in the tradition of anti-design activities of Superstudio Mendini and other radical designers of the 60s and 70s who sought to resist the modernist orthodoxy. This kind of work is carried out today most prominently by the interactive design firm Dun & Raby, based in London. I'm sure as students of design you're hot on their trail. They do very exciting work. This is one of their very early pieces from 2000, where just again playing with the notion of benches as strange slippery surfaces. And I think what they do in this is idea of critical design, where the criticism goes into the designed object itself. The object is the one asking the questions about society and of design. That's very exciting, and even though it de-emphasizes my job, the role of the traditional design critic, we kind of get edged out by work like this. But I'm all for it. I think it leads to a very exciting dialogue. So, while I absolutely believe in thoughtful, skeptical analysis of the outcomes and objects of design, and I believe that we do need to write back at designers and back into the profession, that's all important stuff, I'm most interested and inspired when design criticism is directed outwards, towards the public, and connects the intentions, insights, and failures of design to the concerns of the people affected by it. So the question then becomes, well, how do we reach them? How do we reach people with our design criticism? And that's what I'd like to spend the rest of the talk briefly addressing, because I have some ideas about this. I've developed them in 2 spaces. One as a PhD student at the Royal College of Art, looking at the history of design criticism, and in the other applied much more practically as a teacher and chair of this design criticism graduate program in New York that I mentioned. The full name is an MFA in design criticism, but it's DJ named Decrit sort of stuck, so that's what we'll refer to it as. So at Decrit, we're devoted to the study and practice of design criticism, and we're always trying to experiment with ways to engage the broadest possible audience in the deepest implications of design. And that's a tricky calibration, but that's what we're always trying to do. We take an expansive view of design, and that's really putting it very mildly, because we look at images, objects and buildings, but also at the systems, networks and infrastructures, technologies that support and connect them. I think often that's where the most interesting stories lie. So my students are looking at topics like the sublime in post-industrial ruin porn, an example of which you can see over here. It's a new sort of genre in photography. The design of multiplex cinema interiors, I think that's a first. The inadequacy of architects' attempts to communicate with their public. The role of smell in design. And the design of personal memorials. Just a few. To zoom in a little, one project I really admired was a student who was writing about, wanted to explore human habitation on Mars, sort of using that as a blank canvas for sort of design critical impact, I suppose. But in the process of it, he spent 2 weeks living in this Mars simulation unit in the Nevada desert, where he and another group of representing astronauts on this mission were carrying out the day-to-day activities of living on Mars. And so his thesis became about the sort of weird dystopian politics of this particular earthly habitation unit. Another student, and very brave, and I was saying that criticism sometimes has to hit head on and take things down, and that's really tough to do, and not everyone is constitutionally made up to do that, but this student was. Vera was just sick of social design movement. This was, sweeping the design world at the time she was doing this, and she was annoyed that there were all these fabulous innovations, but the water straw, which was the most famous thing, the one laptop per child, but there was no sort of, what in architecture it's called post-occupancy critique, where you go back to the site of something you've made and check if it actually works, and she was frustrated that those narratives of whether these, genius insights were actually being implemented, maintained, repaired, and used in the ways the designers had originally envisioned, was certainly not entering the discourse around this field. And she painted a very harsh portrait of it. She was especially critical of the use of smiling children in all of the photographs of these products. And once you start seeing this, you'll notice it too. So the students are forcing sort of odd discussions of design about things like repair and decay, memory and hacker design. They all think should be on the main stage of design commentary. So addressing that really broad range of topics is part of the work of connecting to audiences. But I actually think a lot of the work of connecting to your audience, as you all know as graphic designers, comes down to format. I really don't subscribe to the notion of this lonely critic writing in his garret, annoyed that his writing never reaches anyone. I think it's the job, or a large part of the job of a 21st century critic, to figure out the modes and means of reaching one's audience. So at Decrit, we focus on figuring out ways to get our arguments to their intended publics. I started to make a list of what I think are possible formats for design criticism. And it's fun once you start. But we don't teach all of these formats specifically. What we do focus in on is teaching radio podcasting, video, the use of video essays, curation and event organization. We teach students how to develop and pitch books, and here are some of the successes that have come out of that. How to edit and publish. This is for a chapbook series we do. The one you're seeing on top is about the notion of dress. So it's the style of figures in the public eye, people ranging from Gaddafi to Karl Lagerfeld to the Pope. They were really great essays. And we do lots of public readings. So we launched that chapbook with a reading at a venue in New York. We also teach the students how to present their ideas in public. Every year we put on our own major graduating conference, which is intended to, really kind of launch those students' careers. They get a chance to speak to industry figures. This is the architect Bjarke Engels, up close and personal. And they have to answer questions, in a very public setting. We have around 600 people come to this conference. So we take discussion about design, out into the public realm in many different ways. This is one of my favorite outlets. It's a design and architecture book club that some of my students have set up, and they hold it in various places. This is some steps on the High Line, which is a park in New York, and they give out photocopies of the book that they're reading to members of the public who want to join in. And in this case, it was the William White book, The Social Life of Small Spaces. So it kind of it was relevant to the area. We also teach students how to develop an online presence. Obviously, this is absolutely key to being a 21st century anything, let alone a critic. So in this project, we worked with Twitter as a platform. And, you know, perhaps pushing back a little against Oliver's very negative reading of Twitter, I think it can be used in interesting ways as both, you know, as a tool and as a message, as a kind of a platform for delivery. But you really have to practice, and so I got the students to experiment with using Twitter in different ways, as narratively, as conversations, really kind of engaging conversations, observations and critiques. And they came up with, they edited their own work together into a really great website. But the fun part is then, because they've gathered these ideas from the city, the fun part is then disseminating it back out into the city again. In this case, we projected it out of the windows of our department, so that the words that we'd extracted from the city were being pushed back out onto the streets. And in this version, where we made a little booklet with loose leaf pages, we could actually paste them back up around the city. Okay, so once students have developed their argument, I think then, you know, you can apply it to any medium. It has to have a really sort of strong, well-developed, coherent basis. But then that list of mediums I showed you can go on forever. So when they've written their thesis, which is a pretty scholarly 10,000-word dissertation, I'm not sure if you guys have to do that, but I just see that as the first step. The next thing they have to do is figure out, well, what is my core argument, and what is my target audience, and how would I best reach them? What's the best vehicle? And sometimes it literally is a vehicle. This is the digital popsicle machine for disseminating a selection of educationally beneficial digital toys. This is a dating site for lonely typographers. The student had developed research into the sort of the physical and emotional aspects of typography, and she wanted to communicate to typographers, and so she thought this was definitely a need in that market. This student was looking at nostalgia as a phenomenon in the design of people's domestic homes, but also in these kind of home stores. In New York, we have this place called Urban Outfitters and Anthropology and so forth, and they're very sort of whimsically decorated, a bit like this. And so her vehicle was to give fake house tours, sort of going around talking about the people who live there, and they were very fun. This was another slightly more hard-hitting thesis about graphic designers' complicity in creating misleading food packaging. So she was getting especially upset by the use of pastoral imagery on food packaging, and the role that designers play in kind of perpetuating these myths about how food is produced. So she started spotting all of these recurring visual tropes, and then developed a game of sort of bingo that you could, you know, spot them in the supermarket aisle. But the real way she sort of got this message through is she went to her local bodega, which is a corner store in New York, and got to use it to form it into a pop-up exhibition space, which she called Phony Foods. And she collected different examples of critical packaging designed by students and designers from all over the world, which she displayed on the shelves of this bodega. I'm sorry I don't have a photo of it in action, but it was great. To show you a couple more examples. Another student was really intrigued by the idea that why is it that there are no guns displayed in the major modern collections of design? It seemed that they always they always were historical objects that sort of stopped around the late 19th century, and there was a big gap in the narrative of warfare in modern museums. She did a brilliant thesis, but then she decided to convert this into an app that users could use as they walked around the Museum of Modern Art's design collection in particular, to reinsert that narrative of guns onto the design collection they were viewing. So for example, you know, as they got to particular cases, you know, the guns that were made during that period or by the same designer or somehow interacted with that. In this case, it was the Korean War helicopter next to an M1 carbine that was used in that war. So it interrupted the sort of primary narrative of the museum through this app. And I should point out, obviously, my students are not designers, and you know, some of them are, and that's great, and they go for it. But that's not what it's evaluated on. It's on the idea and the communicative ability of the idea. So they're a little rough around the edges in some cases. This was a very fun one. This student was very interested in the role of public policy and design in housing projects. In England, they're called council estates. I'm not sure what they're called here, but public housing, basically. And if you probably know, in New York, most hip-hop songs reference the projects very, you know, in many ways and frequently. So she created a mixtape, basically, of hip-hop songs that mention the New York projects, different ones specifically, that also functions as an audio tour that would give you information about the way design was used in the projects. And then for the final example of this, Bryn is a graphic designer, and she was looking at the problematics of displaying graphic design in a museum. You know, the recurring question, when you put graphic design in a museum, that's what we're about to see tonight, you know, what does it lose in terms of its context, its value and its meaning when it gets framed, like, you know, Milton Glazer's I Love New York symbol right here. So she looked at traditional display methods, and then there's also a lot more really interesting contemporary examples of exhibiting practice going on right now. You're probably familiar with these, where young designers are really trying to challenge those conventions of how to display graphic design in a white cubes of varying, you know, dimensions. She concluded that the graphic design might be best observed in the wild. So she developed a set of exhibitions in the city of New York around different themes, and for each one she would make a printed map, and then you could have an app for updates on breaking news and new editions. So you'd use the map to sort of navigate around and go and see examples she'd draw your attention to, that would then be explained and contextualized in the materials that she wrote in the brochure. These are just a couple of her exhibits. This was kind of fun, the thing was on. So, these are just some of the ways we're trying to develop what I think is a rich, robust, and sometimes radical design criticism, and some of the ways we're really trying to get it out in the world where it really belongs. By doing so, you know, I think we're helping create, you know, the intellectual conditions for better design. I really do, and it's only the start of a long project. I just believe that the impulse to produce better design doesn't only come from within a design studio or within your talented minds. It must also come from the client's conference room, the factory, from the offices of policymakers, and from the homes of regular people who use design on a daily basis. After all, designers are people too. Voila.